If one thinks of the notion of critical minerals, it's always important to remember that critical minerals are a policy statement by industrialized countries who recognize that in order for their economies to transit to clean energies, they must have access to certain types of raw material necessary to feed those technologies. It's also a recognition by industrialized countries that unless they can win the race of supply of critical minerals, they risk losing their position in the geopolitical structure and the trade power structure as it stands today. Importantly, if you are a government in Sub-Sahara, it's important to think what critical minerals mean for you. They don't mean the same thing as they do to industrialized countries. Most people argue that demand for critical minerals gives emerging market countries, including Sub-Sahara, an opportunity to industrialize by moving away from being a net exporter of raw materials to countries that participate in the value chain of mineral production, processing, refineries, refabricating of metals, and other aspects of the mineral value chain. To be clear, while this is a noble cause and makes perfect sense, it is easier said than done. What are the challenges then of sub-Saharan countries seeking to beneficiate minerals? The first is this. It's important to remember, unlike the European bloc, Sub-Sahara is not legally competent to speak as a single entity because these are countries that come together under different initiatives, but they come voluntarily and they are not bound by law because they don't have the same legal and institutional structure that Europe does. This means that moving forward as a single entity requires careful thought and very specific instruments that can not only bring them ideologically together, but make them legally competent to function that way and contract with each other and others to capitalize on critical mineral demand and related technologies. Another problem facing Sub-Sahara seeking to beneficiate is, one, the absence of infrastructure, whether it is ports, whether it is rail, whether it is airports, for that matter, whether it is the necessary technological and ecosystems necessary to create a groundswell of manufacturing. In Sub-Sahara, this capacity does not exist and renders the region uncompetitive relative to others. On the other hand, it's important for governments in Sub-Sahara to recognize that while able to benefit from current mineral production, the region is competing with other countries and regions just as rich. A good example is the area of nickel. Indonesia leads, Russia is a major producer, Canada is another major producer. In iron ore, between Brazil, Australia, and Guinea, you have some of the world's largest deposits. In lithium, none is bigger than Chile and Australia. What it tells us is that we must not only compete, but we must also attract investment in exploration. Africa's share of global mineral exploration has dropped from 2 figures to single figures. What this tells us is that many of the deposits that are being mined today in Africa are old deposits. We need to find new deposits if we are going to benefit in the continuation of demand for critical minerals. But there is also another policy oversight on the part of sub-Saharan policymakers. It's important to understand mining companies mine and sell commodities. This will not change. You then have those who trade the commodities. And then you have those that specialize in mineral processing and metal production. If sub-Saharan governments want to be competitive, it is not with mining companies they want to have the conversation. On the contrary, it is with the companies that refine and produce metals. And the leader here is China, followed by Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam. The idea that if we just make laws, mining companies will become metal producers is flawed. And at some point, the region's policymakers are going to have to recalibrate their policies to target these companies that have for decades been producing metals and are in fact the world leader in the fabrication of metals, not mining companies.